Well, welcome. Thank you for joining me today. It is April 27th, 2022. I'm Tom Atkinson with the Elizabethtown Church, or the Bladen Church of Christ in Elizabethtown, North Carolina. And I thank you for tuning or surfing into our video today. And if you've been watching us, we're glad you're back. I hope that you will be benefited from our discussions, and if you are, subscribe and share our videos. I have to apologize for being so slow in getting these out, and I'm still somewhat in the Stone Age in regard to this method myself. And so for some of you out there that know more about software than I do for making videos on YouTube, any tips would be appreciated. I used to use a software that was great, but it no longer functions. And so anyway, we're a little slower getting this done than I'd like to be, but I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear from you with questions more about anything you may have concerning your spiritual life or teaching of the Bible. Drop me a note. You can reach me at thefocusofOurfaith@gmail.com. It's all one long sentence or word under lowercase, thefocusofOurfaith@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. If you have questions, comments, even disagreements, that's fine. That's great. That's the way we learn, and that's the way we grow. Now, we've been talking about the afterlife. And we've talked about, what about the afterlife? And in our last video, we talked about the idea of soul sleep and how the Scripture really doesn't support that thesis. We mentioned near-death experience and a few other things such as that. Well, today I want to move into looking at what terminology does the Bible use to talk about the afterlife. Now, we also looked at the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. We've looked at a few other verses. But today I want to move into talking about the terminology. But I want to read something. I found this in preparing for these lessons, and I really thought it was actually wonderful. It is, what do kids say? What does a child say? And I want to start off with this to introduce the point I want to make, but bear with me. What do children think about this topic? Well, I'm going to do it this way. We're going to talk about hell first, because I don't really want to focus totally on what I know is negative in a way, but it's still real and should be discussed, and I'm going to do that. So we'll get that out of the way now, and then in our next video we'll discuss the topic of heaven specifically and the words that are used. But what is hell? How would you describe, part of what we talked about in our last video, how do you describe something that is seemingly undescribable? For example, if you could, and no, we can't do this, but if you could go back in time, and let's say you could find yourself 200, 300 years ago somewhere out in the Midwest, and you are there just to observe and for a short time, and then you leave. Hypothetical. What if a tribe of Native Americans were to come across something that you dropped when you left? Something like this. What would happen? What do you think they'd make of it? What would someone 300 years ago have made of this device? How do you think they would have described it? Well, anybody's guess. Why would they not know how to describe it or what to do with it? Because that's not their world. Let me give you another example of why the terminology is important. People know I like science fiction. And Star Trek has always been one of my favorite science fictions, but there is an episode, there was in one of the movies, The Voyage Home. There's a really interesting spot, very comedic. It's also, everything science fiction includes. But there's a discussion between Dr. McCoy and Mr. Spock. Mr. Spock has, quote, died, and now he's been reconstituted, and his spirit is back in his body, and so forth. This is the story. Dr. McCoy is trying to talk with him about what was it like. And he says, man, you really have gone where no man's gone before, Tevin. And all Spock says, and I love that the writers did this, all Spock says is, and McCoy says, you mean I have to die before you'll discuss death, or your views of death, or your experience with me? Something to that effect. And Spock says, we have no common frame of reference. In other words, he can't describe something to you that you have absolutely no way of conceptualizing. Same thing I pointed out with this. How would you conceptualize this? 300 years ago, what would you say? You wouldn't know where to begin. Oh, it might remind you of any number of things, but let's get to that in a moment. Ran across this article about what the kids say about hell. I love it. I only printed 3 of them. One little 8-year-old girl, they interviewed an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 10-year-old. We'll look at the 9-year-old first. A little boy, 9-year-old little boy. And they asked him, what do you think hell is like? He said, well, I think hell might be underground, all like red and dark. I think it would be even hotter than L.A. Well, yes, it would be. I think the volcanoes are always erupting in hell. That's interesting. That's how he describes it. A place that's hot and red and dark, and there's volcanoes all over the place erupting. Now, that wouldn't be too pleasant. Pardon me. A little 10-year-old boy. He says, I imagine it's like really hot. I imagine it's something bad like carrying a whole big wheelbarrow full of heavy stuff. That little boy, maybe more likely, he's 10 years old, and I can imagine and I can see. If you're like me, when I was 10 years old, I might have been having to haul a wheelbarrow around the yard on a Saturday afternoon to help my daddy. And I don't know, but to him, that's what hell would be like. And then the final one, and I love this answer. Little 8-year-old girl says, I think cats are evil. Hell might be full of cats. From the mouth of babes. So why do children describe these things with such terms? Well, because that's what they can comprehend. That's what they can relate to. See, that tells me something about the little girl. The little girl's afraid of cats, or simply doesn't like cats for any number of reasons. I know people that aren't afraid of them, but they just don't like them. Or they don't like to be around them because they're allergic. But anyway, it tells you that there's something about cats she doesn't like. So when you ask her, what do you think hell would be like? She said it'd have to be a place full of cats. And then the little boy is talking about the wheelbarrow. And I imagine he's rolled a wheelbarrow around, and he didn't want to do it. When you're 10 years old, you rarely want to do stuff like that. So they're describing what these ideas are. in terms that they can understand. And that's what the Bible does. It uses terminology that we can relate to. Paul said he was caught up to the third heaven into paradise, and he heard things which he can't describe. We would have to have some common frame of reference by which to fully comprehend what it is like when we cross over. But I want to read to you some of the words that are used in the New Testament and the Old Testament for heaven and hell, and look at these terms and speak about them for just a moment. And and this is why I asked for some input. If you know good software that would be user-friendly, I would certainly like to hear from you. And I wouldn't be putting this up here like this. I would be putting it in the video. But anyway, nonetheless, we can do it the old way. I would think they're really, for the most part, most people are familiar with two words in regard to the afterlife and the hell concepts. But there are other terms, and we'll mention a couple of these. And I put them on a chart here so you can see them. I don't know how well you can see that. I wish you could see it. Of course, it's got some of my notes scribbled on there. But these terms are used because it is what people could understand. The first one in Hebrew is the Hebrew word Sheol. That's found in Psalm 89:48, and it's found in several hundred, if memory serves correct, it's found in several, I don't know how many times the word actually occurs in the Old Testament. My memory is failing me here, but my point is that is one of the words. And when the Greeks thought of Sheol, they used a different word. They used the word Hades. That's an oversimplification, but basically that's what you have. In Luke 16:23, Jesus says that the rich man lifted up his eyes in Hades. In Psalm 89:4, the word sometimes, it's translated grave, and some translations just say Sheol, because that's the Hebrew word. But what we're talking about is the place of the dead. And one of the problems in understanding this terminology is, for whatever their reasons, the King James translators, many years, 1611, translated the Greek word Hades and the Hebrew word Sheol almost there are a lot of exceptions, I'm sure, but the word Hades is not the word hell. Yet the KJV translators put it that way. Consequently, it's almost like it's set in stone. Hades and Sheol are simply referring to the realm of the dead. Nothing more. It says nothing about their status. You have to look in the context. We know the status of the rich man because he was in the place of torment. But he was also in Hades. And Hades was a place where both the evil and the good people went. And they waited. And in waiting, they're separated. This is the imagery. This is how we can understand it. The word Hades and Sheol, actually, the realm of the dead. But I want to stick more with the term Hades at this point. Acts 2, verse 27, you will not abandon my soul to Hades, let your Holy One see corruption. See, Jesus was not left in the realm of the dead. In Greek mythology, now the word Hades comes from the Greek, and it derives from Greek mythology and their belief that this is where people go. It was a realm of the god Hades. And so they believed that when people died, that's where they went, no matter who they were. And it was described as an expanse beneath the earth, somewhere in ancient Greece, where they believed the dead dwelled. And it was also said that within Hades, in this place, was a place called Tartarus, or Tartarus. 2 Peter 2 and verse 4. As you can see that word, Tartarus. And it means something different. Both Tartarus and also another word that we haven't put down here, which is the word Gehenna. That's kind of a word that could be discussed in and of itself. All of that is going to be in this realm called Hades, the waiting place. And 2 Peter 2 and verse 4 talks about the angels who sinned being delivered into chains of darkness, into a place where they are confined. Now the Greeks believed that Tartarus was a place that held the most wicked of all the people. And they went there and were confined. In fact, Hades was the realm of the Titans after their defeat by Zeus. And people, the average person on the street, would know what you were talking about. If I said, man, I sure want to go to that Tartarus place, or when I go to Hades or Sheol, I don't want to be in Tartarus, because they believed it was chambered. You had all these good people over here, bad people in certain places, and that was kind of their conception of it. The region was thought to consist of caves and caverns and darkness, as well as fires and demonic beings, and all types of terrible things happen in the Hadean realm. If you're in the segment of Hades that is Tartarus, you're in darkness. You're cast out. Now, what am I getting at in this terminology? Well, you have to excuse me again. I'm looking for, like I say, it's a typical Wednesday here. Hope it is for you too, wherever you are. But, for example, now go back to our definition of how children described the afterlife. And I'm sure there's far more colorful explanations that I could find. The little girl, her fear of cats, the little boy thinking it would be like having to push a wheelbarrow around all day loaded with bricks. Another boy talking about fires and volcanoes. And my point is, they use those terms because that's what they relate to. They're fearful of it. So, if somebody asks me, can you tell me what hell would be, exactly what hell would be like? No, I can tell you what is described as being compared to. And we're told, actually, essentially what is being said is this place is far, far worse than I can even explain. So, multiple terms are used to try to convey that concept. Matthew 22:13, there's another word also used in Jude 6, and that is the word zophu. I suppose that's how that's pronounced. And I hope my professors aren't watching. I never was great with some of the pronunciations. But it's a place of darkness, emptiness. In Matthew 22:13, Jesus speaks of the wicked servant being cast into outer darkness. In Matthew 13 and verse 14, it talks about it as a furnace of fire, a place of unquenchable fire. It's a place where the worm dies not and the fire is not quenched. Of course, he's talking about Gehenna in this case, which we haven't even mentioned that word yet. We'll get to that later. But Gehenna was essentially a landfill on the outside of Jerusalem where dead bodies, garbage, trash of any kind, animals, you name it, old food, you know what a landfill is, and it was always on fire. Fires were always burning there to, keep down the stench and the exposure, and what little they knew about exposure and such things as that. They certainly didn't want to be out there living. But Jesus is saying that hell would be like going out there and setting up camp and living in the landfill. And that's what he's trying to do with these words, is say it's like that. Well, what would it be like to go live in the landfill? I could go out there and live in the landfill, but it still would not give me a full comprehension of what it would be like to live in a landfill. Because, see, heaven and hell don't have material things. Those terms, those terms, like that little girl's scared of cats, hates cats, so therefore hell must be full of cats. She hit, her example hits on exactly the point of all the descriptions given in Scripture. Whatever your greatest fear is, that's what hell's like. Whatever amount of pain you think you could never, that's what hell's like. So anyway, these terms do not describe verbatim exactly what it would be like. It gives terms for you to draw some conclusions, saying it would be similar to going out and living in a landfill. It'd be similar to running into a bonfire and throwing yourself on top of it. It would be similar to have your teeth pulled without any anesthetic. You've seen The Running Man. Some of you have. Some of you are probably too young to remember that. Dustin Hoffman movie. I won't spoil it for you, but there's a scene with an evil Nazi where he extracts teeth from someone without anesthetic. Well, you see what I'm saying? If you want to know what hell will be like, it'll be like that. Doing that over, just, that's the best we can comprehend. Luke 16, Psalm 89, Jude 6, 2 Peter 2:4. There's a number of verses you can look at, and those all describe the negative nature of that terrible, terrible place. Now, there is another term that's also used to talk about hell, and that is Gehenna. And I mentioned that it was outside Jerusalem. The Lord mentioned that. Ahaz was 20, well, I'll tell you what. We're going to stop right there because of time constraints on me. We'll pick it up right here. We will recap all of this. And I'm working on finding some software that will allow me to put all this on the screen, so on and so forth. A little effort compared to what I would have to do it now. So I'm open to any software suggestions that would be reasonably priced, or even freeware for that matter, to do this type of thing. And some of you no doubt are more experienced in it. But in the meantime, thank you for watching. We'll come back in a few days and we will talk about heaven and spend more time on heaven, and then we'll conclude our series of what is the afterlife, how will it be. I hope I've encouraged you to think, and like I say, I just ask you to think about it. You don't agree with me? God bless you. Study, research, examine. I'm just giving you a very, very, very small tip of the iceberg in looking at the terms. But it's an excellent question. We'll continue to answer it when we come back next time. Again, thank you for joining me today, and may you have a very